So model context protocol. Okay, this thing has completely taken over my stream. Every new piece of content that I see, it's talking about like how MCP is the future and how everybody needs to adopt it. Like adopt it right now. I mean, I get it. I get it. MCP is important, perhaps. But as an engineer, I just don't want to hear about the promise, you know? I just don't want to hear about the grand vision. I want to see the path it takes to get there. So today we're going to skip all the usual MCP explanations, all the BS, and I'm just going to skip over all the basics as well. Instead, let's go for a little journey, shall we? A journey of building an agentic application and discovering when and where MCP fits in and whether it really matters, okay? We'll explore MCP's advantages, but more importantly, we'll see where it falls short. And to kick things off, what I've done is I have prepared a video. So this is a little podcast app I've made, all right? The beauty of it, it's actually powered by voice agents, okay? So it's a proper agentic app, and we're gonna take this as the little venture we're gonna do together, and we're gonna try to build it up and see where MCP falls into our tech stack.
Hey folks, welcome back to YourTechBud Codes. Today we're diving into something seemingly simple, but oh so deep. Adding numbers.
Absolutely. Adding two integers is like a craft. It's an art form, you know?
An art form? I didn't know math had its own Picasso.
Well, it's all about precision and technique. But let's not forget our Python pals.
Yes, the Python developers. Some of them might need a refresher on how to add numbers.
Haha, true that. But hey, let's show some love with a sample code.
Here's a classic. Def add underscore numbers. AB.
The code got
Return A
generated
plus B.
at runtime.
Simple and sweet.
Simple indeed. But real devs have their secret weapons.
Secret weapons? You mean like using bitwise operators?
Exactly. Bitwise operations are the ninja moves of number addition.
Okay, hold on. I just can't take Python. I'm sorry. I just cannot take Python. Can you do this in JavaScript? Or maybe even TypeScript. Let's just not do Python.
All right,
Oh, it's working
let's
slowly.
switch gears to JavaScript. Who needs Python when you've got JS?
Exactly. Thank you.
For sure. In JavaScript, adding numbers is straightforward. You
Wait. Don't show me the silly plus. Show me the bitwise magic.
All right, let's dive into the bitwise magic. First up, we need to understand how addition works at a binary level.
Okay.
Exactly. Bitwise operations work
Python again.
directly on the bits of number.
Hey, bitwise with TypeScript. Please, come on. We are live. People are listening to us. AI agents are telling.
All right, folks, let's bring TypeScript into the mix. Bitwise operations in
Finally.
TypeScript are just as cool.
Definitely. In TypeScript, you can use bitwise operators like XOR to add numbers without using quote plus. It's all about manipulating bits.
So how does this ninja move work? Let's break it down step by step.
First up, we need to understand the XOR operator. It acts like a binary addition without carrying over.
Got it.
Okay.
So XOR handles the addition part. But what about carrying over? That's where AND comes in, right?
Exactly. The AND operator, AND, helps us find which bits need to be carried over.
So we shift the
I'm
carry
sorry,
to
I'm
the
just too
left.
invested in the
Then what?
storyline now. 1 second. Just let it finish,
Repeat
guys.
the process until there's nothing left to carry. It's like a loop that keeps adding and carrying.
That's some bitwise wizardry.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got a little carried away. How was it? Hope you guys liked it. Oh, by the way, this speed is coming with open model. So if you want to stream on how I build voice AI agents work in real time without using the expensive real-time API, let me know in the comments, okay? That could be a cool next stream. So, all right, cool. Just trying to tease something I'm working on. But you know what? Let's take this apart. Now, what you see here is just a simple prototype. It's a demo, made it in 4 days. Oh, also one more thing. 90% of all of the code generated, it's through Cursor. Yeah, I don't know if we can call it vibe coding. I've been told that it's not vibe coding, but if you want to stream on how I've started developing an app, and this is not a to-do app, right? It's a fairly complex app. There's a lot of things going on here. How you can make an app like this and make sure that it's still 90% AI generated, I can show it to you. Yeah, cool. That could be another stream. Let me know in the comments again. Cool. Okay, so what's the future here? So, I mean, the idea is now it doesn't matter whether the app works or not. Let's just talk about what we're trying to build here, right? Just so that we are all on the same page. The idea is that when you go on documentation, like I'll take BAML for example. I just love these guys. Go BAML, guys. Go BAML. By the way, a lot of the things happening in the podcast app wouldn't have been possible without BAML. Like literally, it would be really hard to do some of the things I've been doing with BAML, especially for the latency stuff. Cool. So wouldn't it be great if we had like a podcast for this page and it gives me examples, it shows me the code, everything, like the experience we just saw, but I can still ask it questions. I'm not saying that's the future, but I'm just saying that's a cool little addition, right? That's exactly what we're going to try and build today. How does the current application stack look like? Let's open our handy tool, Excalibur. So let's try to plot out this architecture. So essentially, today, literally right now, Fluidcast is nothing but a Next.js app. Yeah, it's all in TypeScript. It's literally just one TypeScript code. It's just Next.js. That's all it is, right? There is some experience on the front-end side of things. So we have a front-end layer. This is our experience, okay? And by experience, I mean this is the front-end. Now, we also have a little back-end component. And in a nutshell, what the backend component is doing is that these are AI blocks. So there's some transcription happening. Now, to be fair, transcription can also happen on the front end. I'm using something called Web Speech API. By the way, guys who did not know, your browser can do transcribing for free. Yeah, your browser can do transcribing for free. You don't need to pay for those APIs. So yeah, I've got like transcription over here as well, but ignore this for now. On the backend, essentially what's happening is there's some transcription happening. The backend transcription is a fallback if the browser doesn't support it. Then we have dialogue generation. Dialogue generation might use a frigging database, like a vector database of sorts. So some kind of context, because sometimes to get an answer, like if the question is on doing addition, it needs to know all the ways of doing addition, right? I mean, it should know how bitwise operation works. So you might need some kind of RAG logic. But to take the better example, if you're doing BAML, it needs to know what BAML is. Otherwise, how will it answer those questions? So it does some basic RAG stuff in dialogue generation, very basic stuff. And then it does the final piece, which is synthesis. Essentially, that's how it works. It starts like that and then flows through this, and then it works like this. Again, I'm not getting into the voice agent parts now. If you wanted, let me know. We can do a separate stream on it, because obviously if you do it like this, it's going to be so slow that nobody can use it. It will take like 10 seconds just to generate something. So the point is, again, this is simplified, but I think you get the point, right? This is where we are right now. This is what the MVP is right now, okay? No MCP, just Next.js. That's all there is to it. So we don't need MCP. So for this entire app, we don't need MCP. You know what? Probably the end of stream. We don't need to talk about it. You don't need MCP anymore. What, guys? We don't need MCP. Bye-bye. Boo. Of course we... Did I scare someone? Oh my God. This is going to be crazy. My mic started clipping because of that one. No, I'm kidding. Of course. We're going to talk about MCP. The stream is not going to end this quickly. So let's look at the bigger picture, okay? The point is, I don't need MCP on day one. So the next thing I spoke about was we want to make sure that Fluidcast makes its way to every documentation site. So the point is we need to improve the quality of our RAG system. And one constraint that we have to put on ourselves is going to be that it has to be low latency. Voice agents only work if they work quickly. So we need some kind of a local RAG solution, which is fast, right? Something which just does pre-written FAQs, right? If the user's question falls under some pre-written FAQs, then this RAG is going to work. But the moment the user asks novel questions, like how will it work for my particular use case? How will it work for Pokemons or whatever that is, right? The moment we start getting into that territory, we need fallbacks, and we need fallbacks which are reliable. So they get you the right code snippets, they get you the right pieces of documentation. We need reliable, which could be slow, right? So we are falling back, but since we are actively falling back, we can tell the user, hey, wait a minute, let us do a little bit of research. Okay, now we have an answer, whatever it is. So we might have another component of RAG on docs, okay? We might have that component. Why stop there? We might have another component which says RAG on code, because not every documentation on the planet, not everything would be documented, right? It's possible that, BAML is a fast moving project and their documentation kind of lacks in certain regards. Like maybe not every part of their syntax is well documented. The best place to generate documentation from would be the code, right? I mean, generate docs from code. That's like literally the best thing you can do. So rags on code. Now you'll be like, wait a minute, Noreen, why? Like, why on earth are you not embedding all of this into Next.js? Because the truth is, sometimes you need Python. Yeah, I said it. I might need Python. Hey, doing rag on code might require chunking, enrichment, and things like that, which is way above the pay grade of the JavaScript ecosystem, okay? It's possible that I might need to use Python, okay? Come on, give me a break. I can use Python, okay? Even though I think Python developers are absolutely a bane of society at this point. But okay, anyways, so we need components like rag on docs, rag on code also. So the code being generated is of good quality, right? A 14 billion parameter model for everything, not possibly the best idea. Maybe this can be a little bit slower because you noticed this stays around even if the dialogues were proceeding, right? So the model being used to generate code can be a little slower, could be like a sonnet, which is using a lot more context, which takes time to generate the context while this moves forward because it's fine. And that's how I've even made it right now. So what's going to happen is this dialogue generation part can fall back to these boys. Something like that, right? Nothing too fancy, pretty straightforward. We're not even talking about MCP at this point. Yeah, I know, we're not talking about it. It's on purpose. Talking about MCP is useless. You can see 10 other videos which talk about it. Just bear with me, Okay, cool. So now we'll have to start breaking these up into separate things. And why are we breaking it up into separate things? Because let's be real, this is not going to be a hobby project, okay? I mean, if you're doing it, let's do it for real, okay? Even if I'm not going to be doing it, but hypothetically speaking, let's just believe that this is going to be real. I would need concentration of resources, maybe some people just working on the code part. I would need some people working on just making the best rag solution for docs. I would need some people to work on, the code generated. Maybe even this part could be like a separate service, right? These are all separate services, if I wasn't very clear already. These are separate services. And my Next.js team would just be focusing on crafting the best experience. That's how a real company operates, right? You don't have one person doing everything. That's not how real applications are built. The moment we introduce separate services, like the moment I start saying these are separate services, the biggest question will come, how will my dialogue generator start interacting with them? Because it's over the network now. Now we're starting to communicate over the network, okay? And it's going to happen. I'm not even talking about this crazy ecosystem or world where everybody needs to talk to everybody. I'm just talking about a simple application where my front end is in Next.js. All my voice agent is basically in Next.js. And my rag stuff is in Python, which is a very practical frigging scenario. And they need to talk to each other. A very practical scenario again. The question is, how do I make them talk? Now, assuming it's a big team and I've got like a couple of people working on this, couple of people working on this, couple of people working on this, all right? The next question becomes, if they all do their own goddamn thing, the person maintaining the Next.js code is going to have a very hard time integrating, right? If they all build their own stuff, like this is working on HTTP, this is working on gRPC, this is working on GraphQL, that's a lot of burden on the Next.js team to bind this agent. Oh, this is my agent, by the way. This is the agent. This is the voice agent, right? So that's the voice agent. Let's just make sure we write it out. Voice agent. Sweet. So there has to be some consistency within my team so that we make sure that, okay, adding these services is not as hard as it could potentially be. Now we're going to start having some consistency in the APIs to interface with these guys, right? And of course, in our case, because we are dealing with such low latency things and we are streaming all the frigging time, we might use something like server-side events or WebSockets. Probably didn't have to mention this, but why not? So this is where we've reached so far. We have a standard interface so that we can talk to them. But it's not that everything is replaceable. Just because I say standard interface doesn't mean I'm going to treat them all equally. What I mean by this is rag on docs or rag on code will only be called before dialogue generation. Code generation will be called after dialogue generation. So even though it's like a standard way to talk to them, when I talk to them in my agent loop, like in this agent function, whatever, in this agent, when I talk to them is going to be different. Okay. So to be absolutely clear, I might have a standard which says your URL has to look like this. These are tools, so we'll call them tools. Tool, maybe something like tool name. And let's say the body will always look something like this. It's going to be JSON, right? So it's going to be something like JSON, which says, do we want to stream or not? Right? Do you want to stream or not? Because not everything requires streaming. And maybe the params. And these essentially will be the parameters you pass to the tool, right? Something like this. Again, oversimplified. Absolutely. But this is the standard way. Now I can talk to this, whether it's I'm doing a RAG, whether I'm doing code generation. So in RAG, I would essentially be passing the user's question to the RAG agents. But in code generation, I would essentially be passing the description of the code to be generated, right? So the dialog says that, okay, to explain this dialog, I need a code which fits this description. That's how my dialog generation works. So the dialog generation essentially goes and says that, okay, you know what? I'm going to be explaining this. To explain this, I need a code which kind of looks like this. So dialog generation is not really generating the code so that it can move on with life, right? It doesn't have to use its brain a lot. So this happens before dialog generation. This happens after dialog generation. They're all using the standard interface, but when they are called in the agent's lifecycle or the request processing lifecycle is different. Very important point, guys. Just because they use a standard interface, that doesn't mean they treat it equally. Because when we talk about MCP, and yes, we are going to be talking about MCP soon, this is going to be a hard requirement. And this is going to be true no matter what app you're building. Because you'll never treat every tool alike. It's just not possible. There has to be some difference. And in this example, like I showed you, these are called before dialogues. This is called after dialogue. Sweet. So now we started creating some kind of a standard protocol to make sure that these guys can talk, right? What is a protocol? It's like the URLs they need to have. It's the body which you need to pass. It also the transport layer. So they're just not going to say HTTP and call it a day. We're going to say that, okay, in HTTP, you have to give me server-side events or you need to use WebSockets, whatever it is, right? So it's a very standard way of talking to things. That's what I mean by a protocol, okay? Now, the real thing could be that RAG for code or RAG for docs may have different tool name. The tool name this guy uses could be different than the tool name this guy uses, could be different as well. It's also possible that RAG on docs doesn't just have one API, it has two APIs. So it has one API for, when you want to get documentation pages, like relevant chunks of the document. There could be another API which specializes in getting code samples, right? It just picks the code samples for that. So that could be two separate APIs. The point is, each service could have n number of APIs. Okay. And they can constantly keep adding APIs and removing APIs. That's the beauty of microservices, right? We can keep adding or removing APIs on the frigging fly. Okay. Now, every time they modify their API or change their tool name or something like that, would you want the Next.js team to keep updating it? So every time there's a new release in RAG on code and, let's say they add a new tool, do you want the Next.js team to do an update as well? Engineering wise, do you think that's a good idea? Not really, right? The entire point of microservices is that they can be deployed independently, that they can be worked on independently. So we need a way now. We have another problem. We need a way in which we don't have to change our Next.js code whenever there's a new deployment here. In fact, let me take it to the next level. What if somebody creates another RAG? So it was RAG on docs, RAG on code, and maybe this is RAG on vibes. Because why not? We're getting into vibe coding. So sure, why not? We have a RAG on vibes now. So if tomorrow a new service also comes in, I don't want to keep updating my Next.js app. That just sounds stupid. So we have two problems here. Okay. How do we handle the scenario when new tools get added or tools get changed? Or, the parameters of the tools get changed? How do we handle those scenarios? How do we handle scenarios where your entire new services get added? So let's try to solve the first one. So this was how do you talk to them, right? Okay, cool. So we have a protocol on how to call them. Now we need some part of the protocol to discover them. In the ops world, rather the DevOps world, we call this service discovery. So we need another API. Let's say we create an API called tools. And what this API will return is as the response. So this was actually the request. So do we need to put a separate color? You know what? I'm not putting colors for everything. Okay, you guys are smart. You guys figured it out. As the response to this API, each service will give me an array. And in the array, they will be like, we have tool with a name. We have args, which is like JSON schema, or BAML or some schema. So what will happen is every service has a /tools API. And what they will do is they will return me an array of all the tools name and things like that. You don't need to call it tools, call it anything. Just because I say tools doesn't mean that an AI has to call it, okay? It could be called manually as well. It doesn't matter. Like whoever can call it. The point is you have an API which gives you all the APIs, the name of the APIs. This is the same name you put here. So I'll just call it name for consistency's sake. And the JSON schema is the structure or the schema in which I need to give the parameters. So I'll call this param because I've called it params in that place. Let's keep things nice and consistent. So this will help me discover all the tools here, right? I would need yet another thing to figure out what services are there, because what if this rag on wipes came about? So in this case, I would actually need, I'm running out of colors here. Oh my God. I would need some kind of service discovery, right? Which my app can listen to, which gives me, again, a similar list, but here it will just give me service. So which service it is, whether rag on docs, rag on core, rag on vibes. And it might also give me some tags. What do I mean by tags? Does this do generation? Does it do context, right? Because remember I said my rag stuff over here was strictly for generating context for the dialogues, but this was for code generation. And again, today we are generating code. Tomorrow, we might want to generate mermaid diagrams, right? We might want to draw sequence diagrams. So we might want to use mermaid. So again, this doesn't have to always be code. This could also be diagrams generation. I don't know, man. It could be any frigging thing. We have an interesting question. I have to take this up. That's a good question. But you can just initialize at the beginning and check for changes to a file itself though, right? So the question essentially is, I drew this service discoverer or the service discovery service as a separate HTTP service, right? The question is, why not change it into a file? Why can't we make this a file which is kept over here? And essentially, this file has this JSON object. So whenever this file changes, Next.js can, reload itself and say that, oh, a new service has just propped up. This file, again, it depends on you. Do you want to just make this file list down the services? Do you want this file to also list down the tools? So if you make this file list down the tools as well, like this is the service, and you could have a separate parameter here which says, okay, these are all the tools within that service. You could keep that file as well. The point is, you decide. You decide how you want to do it. Keep it in a file, keep it in a service. Good points. The point is, you would have to do it. But a big point, a big point, a super huge juicy point that I want to highlight. We moved from a development concern to an ops concern. So originally, if you come from the LangChain world, every time you want to add a tool, you have to import it. Let me take an example here. Ooh, by the way, check out Latent Space. Yeah, big shout out to those guys. They are really good. I cannot use them. I'm not going to lie. Travely? Okay, sure. That's like the default search, right? So every time you want to use a tool, you do this. You do a pip install, then you gotta set those environment variables or God knows whatnot, then you have to import it. It's a dev concern. Every time you want to add new tool, the consumer, so obviously somebody had to create the tool, so obviously somebody had to develop that tool in the first place. But to use the tool, a developer had to change their code base. Yes, exactly. Right now, we moved from that concern, we made it a configuration issue. So it's ops, it's operations, right? So it's an operation burden now. This is a thing you can solve by DevOps. You can have a CI/CD pipeline which updates this file. Or you can have a service which, gets configured. Like every time you're deploying something, my CI/CD pipeline can update the service discoverer. So the service discoverer goes like, yeah, I know it. Every tool in my case is publishing the tool list themselves, right? So now it's an ops concern, not a dev, because this is a big point I want to drive home. Screw MCP. I think we need to start just talking about this. I can't explain this enough. Okay. Ops is easy to manage. This way, my Next.js team, because remember, we are building a goddamn product here. My Next.js team can focus on what truly matters. The best frigging experience there could be. Actually, you know what? Guys, we just built our own MCP. Is this a surprise? I hope this is not a surprise. Obviously, we have more to get to. But this was not a surprise, right? Sweet. So yeah, what is MCP? There's a growing list of pre-built integrations, blah, blah, blah. Pre-built or not, again, in our case, we build those integrations ourselves, but we want to plug them directly into our LLM. We want the flexibility to switch different LLMs and vendors. Yeah, there we go. In tools, it helps with discovery. So this tools list, okay, not exactly the same. We just had a /tools. They have a /tools list. So this tool, this one API gives us a list of all the tools. Then there's invocation. Invocation is us using it. Invocation, right? So MCP has that. And flexibility. So tools can, range from anything. They can do simple things. They could do hard things. It doesn't matter, right? And this is how it looks like. Great. We had the tool stuff. The MCP protocol already supports discovering tools. It also supports calling tools. Two things we needed. Now, another question which we had was the transport, this part. Because even if you have a fixed protocol on how to talk, if your transport is not fixed, that's still a problem, right? While MCP is transport agnostic, it builds everything on top of JSON RPCs, which is nothing but JSON over REST, kind of. And it supports server-side events. So it doesn't use WebSockets, which is a good reason. Not every deployment environment does WebSockets. So it does support SSE. So whenever you're doing client-server, just use SSE and call it a day, whatever it is, right? And it gives us pre-built libraries to do all of this. All you need to do is, you create a list API, say which tools are there. So each server which you have, each service which you have, these are servers. Each server which you have would essentially describe the tools they have. And like I said, the name, the description, the schema, the same stuff we already spoke about, right? And then you would have to implement a call which just says that, oh, you know what? What's the name of the tool to call? And then do a switch case on the name and then see if it was calculate sum, call calculate sum and stuff like that, whatever it is. Now, I wouldn't say it's the best interface. They could do a better job. Sure. I don't honestly care. The point is MCP is doing the same thing. But does it mean you have to use MCP? Obviously not. You can make something of your own. And also this service discovery, MCP is going to introduce a schema registry API soon. I don't think they have quite done it yet, but I know it's in the talks. Let's go in the roadmap. Service discovery. There you go. So MCP is going to support service discovery as well. But again, we don't need MCP. We could technically just make it ourselves, okay? And if you make it yourselves, it's more flexible that way because then I can use WebSockets, I can do discovery through files or whatnot, right? Let's move on to the next step. Again, coming back to FluidCast. The truth is, to make FluidCast successful, first of all, it needs to go in the documentation of other tools, right? But other tools might have APIs of their own. Obviously, we are not the first people trying to create a RAG layer on documentation, right? For example, Boundary ML, like BAML, they already have a search API, right? Simple search. Could be powered by Algolia, could be powered by something else. I honestly don't care. But it's keyword search if I'm not wrong. So if I search for, modular API, the new stuff which came out, it shows me right here and I can bounce to it. Great, works. So they've got this search API which could be handy. So the point I'm trying to build is, instead of us reinventing the entire wheel here, why don't we just plug into the APIs they already have? Because they already have these things. So why not just plug into them? Cool. So now, wouldn't it be great if we could potentially integrate into that? So far, we've been in our environment. So all of the code we're running was written by us, being run by us. That's a big point, okay? Now, we're getting into a place where BAML has their own set of APIs. So I'm just going to call it Boundary ML because that's the company. And they have their own set of APIs, right? So BAML has an AI agent which can answer questions. AI agent. It could also have search. And let's say I want to use that. But the problem is, do they even expose an API? And if they expose the API, it's definitely not going to follow this. Because I made this, we made this ourselves. So now what we'll have to do is end up writing an adapter which talks to this API, and then my app can then talk to this. Does that make sense? I have to make an adapter. Or these guys would have to make the adapter on their part. So they would make a FluidCast adapter. Depends who's more popular. So either they make an adapter. So if they make an adapter, I can talk to it directly, sort of. Or I make an adapter and I talk to them. But again, there could be a LangGraph doc as well, and they could have their own APIs. So every time I want to onboard a new documentation website, or every time a documentation wants to onboard FluidCast, I would have to keep updating this. Not just that. I'll also have to worry about some security. There has to be some security layer here, right? Because you saw the AI agent was behind a login session. Like the user would have to log in or whatever it is. Now, this is a territory where a lot of people might find themselves already. Like if you're a tool or if you're a product and you're remotely close to the AI world, I am sure you have someone in your team making adapters for LangChain or Llama Index. But if you're remotely close, let's say I launch a database company and remotely I have vector support, undoubtedly I'll have to go ahead and make the SDK or the adapter for LangChain or Llama Index. I'll just have to do that. There's no way getting out of it. And you have to do it because in that case, LangChain or Llama Index, which should be this side, they're so freaking popular that everybody uses them. To tap into that ecosystem, you would have to implement an adapter for that guy. And again, they could have like a ton of things. They would have to make adapters for so many different players, right? Different things like Cursor. Maybe we have code editors somewhere and they use Cursor, right? We have Cursor. Even Cursor needs to use these docs, doesn't it? Today, we use @docs in Cursor, which technically means Cursor has like a rag on docs internally, right? But these guys could have an API which is far better than Cursor's generic rag for docs. So if Cursor wants to implement this and Cursor had its own API, they would have to create an adapter for Cursor as well. The life of the not popular guy, the life of the guy who's not popular, in this case, let's say Boundary ML, they would have to create adapters for everybody because they're just not popular. But if Boundary ML was popular, and let's say Fluidcast and Cursor wasn't, Fluidcast would have to create the adapter for Boundary ML. The point is, depending on who loses the popularity context, you have to do some work. So if you cannot win the popularity context, you'll have to do the work of creating an adapter. This popularity context is what we call ecosystems. Now we're getting into ecosystem territory. Llama Index, LangChain is an ecosystem. They're not just tools. They're an ecosystem. They're an ecosystem where you know that, okay, even if I hate LangChain, I can bet that I'll get tools of almost every tool on the planet for LangChain. I'll just get it, no matter what. A lot of people might be using LangChain for just that. Cool, now we're getting into ecosystem effects. Anthropic is one of the biggest players in this game, whether you like it or not. They have one of the best models. They're one of the leading competitors in the LLM space. Another one who's big, LangChain. They're big as well. In fact, these guys are so big that even though they're crappy, and even if companies who are creating adapters for them think their customers should never be using it, and they would actually recommend people to not use it, they would still create an adapter for it. It's that freaking popular. So whatever these guys do is undoubtedly going to be the new standard. So LangChain and Llama Index has been a standard when we stay in the dev concern territory. So if we stay in the territory where the Next.js app has to be modified every time you want to add a new tool, that's where LangChain is right now. These guys came in and they're like, wait a minute, let's put it over the network. And the moment you put it over the network, we are getting into ops. We are shifting concerns to the ops world. And they came up with, well, not a surprise, MCP. So it's the same thing. MCP is not a brand new concept. It was always happening. You can go and you can be like API reference and you can look at any one of these things, let's say node processors, and here's your service registry. This is your service registry right here, right? Because it's a dev concern, you need to show it in a form devs can understand, right? So in the dev world, we read docs. So it's a dev concern, right? So this is your service registry. Now, there would be some reference on what this class looks like. Yeah, like base component. There you go. This component on what you need to interface, that's the schema which we had right here. This guy, the schema. How do you call this? Implement this interface and you're good, right? The documentation we saw where we saw the list of all tools, that was this part, listing all the tools. Actually a mix of service registry and thing. But to use it, you modify your code. MCP is just that. It's just that. There's nothing fancy. It's just doing it over the network. Does that make sense? So it's nothing new. And to anybody who says, why should I adopt MCP? The question is, would you use something like Llama Index or LangChain for the tools? Or would you prefer doing it yourself? Would your customers prefer using LangChain or Llama Index just to get access to you? Or would they prefer doing it themselves? It all depends on that. So at the end of the day, MCP is not a protocol. It's an ecosystem. The standard layer MCP proposes is not to solve engineering problems. I mean, these are not new problems to solve. The reason MCP exists is to create an ecosystem, a standard ecosystem. That's pretty much all there is. That's literally all there is. Okay, cool. I think we covered MCP. This is what MCP is essentially. I know it's a very long way of going about it and saying it, but you saw even as a basic app builder, when did I start considering MCP, right? During a good long period, I did not have to use it at all. I was just on my Next.js app. I was in my world. Everything was cool. The moment my team started becoming big and I started diving into some specific problems and specializing, I started introducing services just because that's the way things evolve. Naturally, you end up with some services. It's not always going to be a monolith eventually. So we started introducing some services and things like that. And then we needed the standard protocol. Again, I didn't have to use MCP. I could have just been with myself. And in fact, the protocol I make will be perfect for me because I made it, you know, and I'm arrogant. Yes, I'm arrogant, but you know what? If I'm designing something, it's going to be perfect for me. That's how arrogant I am. But the moment I get into the ecosystem part, that's where my arrogancy could come and bite me. Because, I mean, even though I think I've made the best protocol on the planet, but my customers might not consider this a valid investment. They will be like, hey, I'm not implementing it for everybody. Or me implementing it for them again and again, that also would be super annoying, right? So this becomes the bottleneck in my case. The moment I get into this ecosystem territory where I need to integrate with my customers or my customers need to integrate with me, we're going to need some standardization. But now let's start getting into problems. Let's start getting into things which MCP does not do. Let's start getting into areas which MCP falls apart. Because this is very important. Because if you're designing, okay, it's really important to understand where the pitfalls are and what it does not do. And what are the cases where you might have to go back and say like, wait a minute, MCP doesn't do this right now. Or wait a minute, we'll have to figure this out. So, okay, cool. Let's buy into this MCP madness for now. So we're going to say that, okay, Boundary ML has their own API for sure, but they also have MCP. And I have an MCP adapter. So these could be custom protocols, doesn't matter. Honestly, you do you, man. Nobody cares. You could make this MCP, you could not make this MCP. It honestly doesn't matter. But the point is, you have to have some MCP adapter at some point. So either you are native MCP or you have an adapter. Either ways. So let's start talking about some problems. So first, some terms. The guy offering the tool is called an MCP server. The guy consuming the tool is called MCP client. Okay? Just remember that. And this medium, the way we talk to them is the protocol, which is backed by a transport. So a transport is the server-side events and the sessions which are happening under the hood. Mostly for most MCP implementers, the transport is hidden. You don't have to worry about the transport. You just have to worry about the protocol. So you have to use the ugly SDK. Sure, cool, fair enough. We can live with this. All right, let's look at some scenarios which we need to solve for Fluidcast, and let's see how MCP fits into it. Like, what feature of MCP can we leverage? Does MCP fall flat? How does it work? So let's start with the most obvious thing, and that was Boundary ML. To use their agent, I have to log in. Let's just assume that, okay, whatever reason they have this login page for, it's a valid use case for them. Let's just go with it. So Boundary ML literally requires the end user to log in to use their agents. However, whenever I'm using their search, I did not have to log in. Now, how do we model this? How do we model that security piece which I just spoke about? So currently, I think MCP doesn't have anything on security. At least the last time I saw it. Authentication. Yep, they currently don't have it. To use the AI agent, which there have to be an experience saying that, hey, you're trying to use feature which requires you to sign in into Boundary ML. So do you want to sign in? Then I would say, okay, sign in with Boundary ML. Like how we see sign in with Google, we'll see something similar. We'll see a sign in with Boundary ML. I will click on it. I'll be redirected to this page. I will sign in. And then I will come back here and then it works, right? So people would have to leave Fluidcast or they would have to leave their documentation to go back to that page. Whoever doesn't know this, this is an end user authentication flow where we authenticate human beings. It's called OAuth 2. You might have heard of OIDC. OIDC is again this, but only for authentication. It's like a subset of this, but just for authentication. OAuth 2 supports authorization as well. So whenever we need to generate BAML code, whenever the user explicitly says, hey, I want to generate some BAML code or a very explicit BAML use case, which the agent should do. So basically this guy, dialogue generation, decides that, oh, you know what? We need to go and we need to start using that agent now. It's going to be really important. Now, FluidCast, would have to have some mechanism which says that, okay, this is not a code sample. This is going to be a BAML sample or whatever. I need to figure that out, that, okay, user, so far you never created a BAML account. But since you're on the BAML site and you're asking me very BAML specific questions, do you want to sign in with BAML or do you want to default to something else? The point is my experience just got screwed up because I'll have to incorporate that authentication mechanism somehow because BAML requires me to sign in. Of course, it's in their roadmap to have some guidelines on it, but at the end of the day, I still need to figure it out. I'm not saying I have an answer to this. I'm just saying it's something that needs to be done. And there is no right answer. Depending on how your experience is, your answer could be different. Cool. Another form of authentication could be that, you know what? You can use my API, but as FluidCast. People on the planet cannot use the API. FluidCast explicitly is getting access to use the API. So FluidCast will be billed for the API. So FluidCast would have to pay for consuming that API. Or the Boundary ML team will pay the bill, but they at least want to tag that, okay, this bill was generated because of FluidCast. So they want some kind of a mapping that, okay, this is not an anonymous request to the server. This is a request actually coming in from FluidCast. How do you solve that problem? You use something like API keys or a service account. Let's go to Grok Dev Console. Okay, cool. So over here, you always have this API key. Oh, my key got deleted. Oh, interesting. Doesn't matter. The point is, you cannot just use Grok's APIs for free. I mean, you can't just do that. I mean, yeah, you can technically use it for free, but you cannot use it as an anonymous user. You have to create an account. But once you create an account, your application doesn't have to log in with your name. You just create a frigging API key. So like ABC, test me out, submit. It generates this key. I copy it and I delete it immediately because I don't trust you guys. And then I can use that API key in my application. My application doesn't have to log in as me. This is machine-to-machine auth, right? This, through the key, Grok Cloud would exactly know who's the caller. So now my service would have to start storing those keys. So to summarize, we probably have to authenticate because they are not going to make their APIs for everybody on the planet. In that case, if it's machine-to-machine, if they just care that, okay, you know what, I just want to know that the request is coming from FluidCast. So they give me an API key or some kind of a service account token, some token, and I have to store it myself in some secret manager. And I have to store sensitive information, which I hope never gets leaked on the planet. But if you're a streamer like me, you've done that like 10 times already. And you have to store it yourself and you have to maintain all of that stuff. MCP is not going to help you there. And you'll have to make sure that, you know, every request you send there, you insert that into one of your headers and things like that. Okay. Another thing, if Boundary ML said that, oh, you know what, I don't care if FluidCast uses or who uses it, I need the end user to authenticate. Like we need end user authentication. In that case, things get even more complicated because now your Next.js would have to like sign into Boundary ML. Boundary ML will say that, okay, this user is allowed to use FluidCast. So they'll have to redirect back to FluidCast. Whole complicated process. And now whenever the user uses our experience, like the FluidCast experience, we'll have to make sure that the OAuth credentials generated, there are some tokens generated by OAuth, it's passed through the entire frigging system and reaches all the way here. The point is, these are complicated things. It's not straightforward, and MCP is not going to solve it. Remember I said in FluidCast, we have two kinds of services for now. We have the generation stuff, which comes after the dialogues. And we have the RAG stuff, which is like context, which comes before the dialogue. Now, MCP doesn't know about those things. MCP has nothing like, oh, this is tools for generating context, or these are tools for generating code. I mean, MCP has nothing on that. It doesn't have anything on that. That's just the way MCP is, apparently. So the problem here is going to be, how do I know this Boundary ML tools are supposed to be for context or for generation? Like, how do I know whether their agent API is made for BAML generation or whether it's used for just getting context or whether it can be used for both? Like, how do I know that? Your agent loop, your voice agent, expects things to be done a very specific way. And it's always going to be that. You're never going to have a generic loop. Like Claude Desktop is a generic loop. Like Claude Desktop, you ask it something, it does something. That's pretty much it. But that's because it's a generic tool. The moment you get into like non-generic tools, you're not trying to make a tool for any use case. You're trying to make a tool for specific problems. The point is your flow could be specific. MCP has no relations on that. So the promise that MCP makes that, you'll be able to discover tools and their meaning dynamically, it's not a very true promise. MCP is not going to help you. Either your adapter would have to create that segregation for you. So again, the way you talk to the adapter is not going to be very custom because, like I said, you would need this, right? You would need this tags feature which we spoke about. You would need these tags to say whether this service does this or not. And maybe your tags are not on the service level. Maybe your tags are on the tools level. So maybe your tools discovery has the tag, whether this tool is for a generation part or is it for context part, whatever it is, right? So the point is you would diverge from the MCP protocol at some point, and your adapter would have to be cognizant of that and it would be like, okay, this guy has two things, but when the front end asks or when my Next.js asks for, okay, give me all the tools for RAG, it gives the search tool. But when my front end asks, okay, now give me all the tools for code generation or for generation stuff, it will give the AI agent tool. Or maybe the AI agent tool is given for both of these, depending on how the AI agent tool is used. So MCP doesn't solve the complete discovery problem. That's what I'm trying to say. It cannot. It's just not possible. Namespace collision also has to be addressed. Yes. What if, these guys have the same tool names? Search. This guy calls search and this guy is also calling search. That's a collision. There could be multiple forms of collision. But the point is you have to handle those things as well in the adapter. These are a lot of things you have to take care of. Another thing, let's look at another problem. Again, going into the security piece. If fluid cache is being used on the BAML docs, only then are you allowed to use the BAML MCP. If I was on the LangGraph docs, then you can use the LangGraph MCP. The point is, all MCPs are not going to be available all the frigging time. So you'll have to have your own system, and that's where I made this a service and not just a file system thing or a file, is because the services you expose to the voice agent will be different based on who's using it or even what experience they're listening to, right? Is it a podcast on, or is it a voice experience on the BAML docs? Is it a voice experience on the LangGraph docs? Is it a voice experience on the FluidCast page? Like FluidCast could be a podcast app by itself, right? So if it's something here, maybe you can't use either one of them. I don't know. The point is, even filtering it out, and even if you have 100 different tools, you cannot give your voice agent all the tools at once. Filtering them out, all that stuff, all those nuances still has to be done for you. So MCP is not a magic bullet. It's not solving engineering problems. The engineering problems are always going to be there, no matter what. It's just the way it works, unfortunately. Okay. However, it's solving an ecosystem problem just so that everybody doesn't have to implement the same thing. Now, the last thing I want to cover, MCP is not just tool calling, and I want to highlight that. There are two more things MCP does. The second one I don't really care about, but I want to talk about one more thing. Cool. The point I'm going to highlight here is this entire podcast was adding numbers in Python. Okay. Now, this was supposed to be a dab or a joke on Pythonistas. So the code generated was supposed to be in Python. But what if this was a generic podcast which says, oh, you know what? It's just talking about bitwise addition. Doesn't matter what language. It could be any language. So here, wouldn't it be great that the app remembers that, hey, you know what? I prefer Golang as my language. Or maybe you prefer TypeScript as your language. Nobody prefers Python. So wouldn't it be great if the entire code generation sample and the dialogue, all the code and stuff which was being generated, all of that is tailored to my language of choice? Essentially what I'm saying is, what if there was a way to have state in this service? So whenever this service generates some code, it always generates code in the language of my choice. Whenever this guy generates dialogues, it always generates dialogues keeping in mind that, okay, I like TypeScript. What if I could have state, right? What if I could have state? And what if the user could even modify that state? Like what if FluidCast had a way to say that, oh, you know what? The user seems to like TypeScript a lot. He keeps talking about TypeScript. So you know what? Let's just store it somewhere that the user likes TypeScript. There are two parts to this. One is identifying that the user likes TypeScript. Either the user says it explicitly themselves or you identified using AI yourself. Really depends. But the point is, there has to be some mechanism in which you identify this, right? The second, you need a mechanism to store this. Let's say we only care about code generation. So this guy, whenever there's no specific language of choice, this guy always defaults to the language of choice of the user, okay? If there was an explicit language of choice, use that. If there's no language of choice, default to the one by user. So now somewhere the agent or my Next.js app needs to tell this guy that, hey, the user's preference is TypeScript. The detection part is up to the Next.js script. Nobody's helping you with that. You'll have to figure that out yourself. Whether, again, the user says it explicitly or you figure it out using AI, it doesn't matter. The point is you have to figure this out yourself, right? You have to figure this out yourself. Next.js takes care of this. However, there has to be some API where this guy says, you know what? I am allowing you to configure things. I'm allowing you to configure the default language of choice of the user. That's the only thing I'm allowing you to configure. And then this guy can be like, oh, you know what? I want to update the user's language of choice. So you know what? This guy has APIs to update that and get that. So I can update that. And now whenever it's generating some code, it will use that because there are sessions, right? Remember, there are sessions. There are MCP sessions under the hood. Because there are sessions under the hood, you can use that to essentially say that, oh, you know what? Okay, cool. Because it's Narain who's going to be listening to this, I'm going to generate it in TypeScript. Okay. MCP has supports for doing things like this. It's called resources. Okay. It's not something the LLM configures. Essentially, your code generator is saying that, okay, you know what? I can store preference data against the user. And your LLM client, in this case, this is the client, needs to say that I want to store this as a preference thing. And you would have to write some code manually to use that feature. So it's essentially like just calling an API. Nothing fancy here. It's just that this guy is saying that, hey, I have another API to store some state. And this guy says, oh, you know what? I would like to use that API. Let me write some code in for it. It's not dynamic. It's not LLM powered. Nothing is LLM powered in this. The front end or the LLM client is actively deciding that, oh, you know what? I want the feature of saving state. If it did not, then that API was useless. The LLMs are not deciding that I want to update the user's preference. The application code is. So your application would need first-class support to identify or store the user's code preference or the language preference, right? So it's a code change. It's still a development concern. So resources helps you do that. Why would you use MCP for this? Again, why not? If you're already using MCP for tools, then now you have a standard way of calling APIs. It's not that, okay, this is suddenly going to be in gRPC, which you have to learn. It's just a standard way of doing things. But again, you have to write code for this. So it's not complying with the world where LLMs are deciding everything. It's something you have to consciously code and make changes for. The last thing is prompts. MCP also has first-class support for prompts. Like sometimes for code generation, you might want to use a different prompt for actual programming languages, and you might want to use a different prompt for fake programming languages. So Golang TypeScript has real prompts. Python has a different prompt because that's a fake language, right? So the point is, you might, or even the application in that case, the ability to select what prompt to use. Something like that. So my dialogue generation, I want to change the way dialogue generation happens. And the prompt I use for dialogue generation, I'm getting from this guy because this guy is like, oh, you know what? Have these special things in your prompt if you want to do dialogue generations for Python code or things like that, Again, I am not really a big fan of that feature, but it's there. If you want to use a prompt template which somebody else has written for a particular use case, you can let the user decide that, oh, you know what? Hey, for this use case, we have a special prompt. Do you want to use that? But yeah, that's pretty much all I had to cover for MCP, guys. MCP is not a magic bullet. It's just a protocol with a very fixed intent. For me, the intent is to start building an ecosystem. It's a start towards building an ecosystem. So obviously you would have your own spec. Like I'm going to have my own spec. I'm not going to be a complete MCP shop because like I said, I've got some nuances where the MCP protocol just doesn't support me enough. So yes, there is going to be things where MCP falls short and I'll have my own spec, but I would definitely add an adapter for MCP irrespective, because even though it doesn't fulfill on the promise that I'll be able to use any tool on the planet, it does make it easier to integrate to new tools. Because there is some level of standardization, and even though I'll have to do some work on top of it, it's less as compared to integrating with a brand new protocol, which is like completely different, right? It's going to make my life easy. It's going to make the life easy for a lot of different players. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, share, and subscribe if you found this video to be helpful. And don't forget, I am your TechBud. You're on YouTube and hopefully in real life.